Okay, good morning. We're going to get started. My name's Kelly Ryan, and I'm with Encourage Community Foundation. And the first thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you to our hosts, the Community Theater, for having us in this space. Thank you to all of you for attending and making it necessary for us to find space that would accommodate more people this year. And that makes me really happy because I'm very proud of this community, and I'm proud of the fact that you're all here because you believe in the future of the community. You believe that information and data is important as we look to the future of the community. So thank you for taking the time to be here. We really appreciate it on behalf of the staff and board of Encourage Community Foundation. So this is our third edition of Vital Signs. The first edition was done with a 10-year view. What we wanted to do was look at the first decade from 2000 to 2010 and to be able to quantify actually what changes had occurred in Southwood County in that decade time period, particularly with the impact of the changes in the paper industry and economy, so that we could quantify what those changes were and look at what were our challenges and also what were our opportunities, and to help the community, residents and institutions, begin to define what were our assets, what were our opportunities, and where did we need to be looking to align resources for collective impact. So the third iteration today really does reflect input from many of you in the room. Over the last year, we were so pleased to see vital signs used in a lot of different ways, and actually got input from a number of different groups and organizations about what additional information would you like to see in this so that it increases in relevance and it's a tool and it becomes a relevant tool for everyone here. So I'm pleased to say that a number of things in today's report that our partners will be presenting are there because of many of you. And the last thing that I'd just like to say before I turn it over to Liz Everson is, as an institution in the Community Foundation occupies space that is, I think, privileged space. And the privilege is that we have the opportunity to look long term. And not many organizations and institutions have that privilege. And not only is it a privilege, it is our mission, is to be a permanent institution in this community. Oftentimes, opportunities, challenges don't present themselves overnight, right? They happen over a period of decades. And I'd suggest to you that nothing changes overnight either. And the ability to take a long-term view on what are we going to do about reducing the percentage of young people living in less than optimal economic circumstances in this community, that requires long-term perspective, multiple players at the table, and I would submit to you that I think that is what the Community Foundation does well. The last thing is, what we have learned in the last decade is that we can commission all the information and data that we want. We can put money into the community. We can do any number of things. None of those things matter if the residents and the people of this community are not engaged. Information is vital. It gives us a common language, a common place from which to start. But if the residents of our community are not engaged in conversation about why does this matter, how does it matter to you, to your neighborhood, to your church, to your place of employment, it really does matter to all of us. At the end of the day, we do believe at the Community Foundation that there are a number of tools and skills that need to be provided to help us move forward at the community level, but none is as important as every one of you being involved in shaping the future of the community. So without further ado, I want to introduce a member of our team and give really incredible credit to a great team of people that have really shaped and worked on vital signs. It's not just a 2-week project, it's a year-long project, is to work in identify and shape what happens here today. So Liz Everson from our staff is going to introduce our partners. I'm very happy and privileged to partner with COWS. So please join me in welcoming Liz and expressing appreciation to our staff.
Thank you, Kelly. We have a really great team, both at Encourage and at Cows, who I'll talk more about in just a moment, who have spent many late nights, more than I care to admit, in preparing the data and the publication that you're about to see. This project is, quite frankly, a labor of love for me. It started out as a love of data, of learning, and today is a tool that is used across the community. Our school leaders, like Kelly had mentioned, are using it in orientation, and our municipal leaders regularly reference it. And yet the data has changed because we've changed, our community has changed. So our vital science conversation continues. This is a living document, one that is responsive to all of our needs. And at your request, this report contains more information than ever before. So to continue this conversation, we're going to use a tool that has helped us in the past. So please take out this worksheet. Everyone, please. And we would like for you, like last year, to write down the following questions. So what's surprising and how is this valuable to you in your organization? And number two, how can this data be most impactful for our future? And if you could also write down how you've used it in the past or how you plan to. And in number three, who doesn't have this data but should? And how do you think we should get it to them? All right, and you'll see that you have a number 4 box on there, and that box is for you. So to write down any additional questions, etc. You will have time after our partners from Cows present to ask them questions. There'll also be time later on in the schedule today for a discussion amongst your peers. So now that we have that done, I have the pleasure of introducing our friends and partners from Cows. Cows stands for Center on Wisconsin Strategy. They're based at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they have deep roots not only in the state of Wisconsin, but also here in Southwood County. This is their second year as researchers and writers of vital signs. And to have this level of expertise in the room today is truly a blessing and something that we're very thankful for. In 2010, national experts ranked them among the top 15 national organizations in workforce development. So without further delay, I give you Laura Dresser and Michelle Mackey.
All right, so I'm Laura and that's Michelle. And I guess I want to start with a little introduction of Cows, but probably also just a appreciation to Encourage for their efforts here and for having engaged with us as partners on this project. It has been a real learning experience for us and a real chance to think about how to use data. So let me talk quickly about Cows and come back to that question of data, but thanks to the whole team here for the work that we have gotten to do. You know, Cows is we're a research center at the University of Wisconsin. We're up in the social science building. If you know the social science building behind the bell tower, that's where our offices are. And we do a lot of projects both in Wisconsin and nationally. You can go to our website and see projects on offering support to secretaries of transportation across the nation and trying to make transportation systems smarter. We have projects to get good policies to mayors, but also have long done work on workforce development and the Wisconsin economy. In fact, we brought some State of Working Wisconsin's, which is the State of Working Wisconsin is a report, just a little secret, that acronym for that report is SOW. The State of Working Wisconsin, because everything is a barn animal at Cows. Once you start with that, we did, that was intentional, but I found that people outside of Wisconsin really feel pity for me for it. But anyway, so there's some data on the Wisconsin economy. But let me say that, I'm, in some essential way, a data person, a geek. It's very easy for me to get pretty excited about a chart. That might feel awkward, but don't worry, I don't know. But for me, the real reason ever that we have cared about data, that I have been excited about data, is the question of what you do with it, what that means. And this forum is what data means. This report is what allows you to have this forum. But as Kelly was saying, data, there's all kinds of data about you that exists. There's all kinds of data more than this. In fact, in many ways, the question when you're thinking about data is not how many questions can you ask, but what question do you need to answer? Because everywhere you look, you can find some data about this community. And what we've tried to do with you is distill that which will paint a picture that helps you see a way forward. One thing, we're going to dig into some data. I know different people had different experiences in math at certain points, so sometimes we may go, if you've got a question about something we're saying, you can slow us down, but we'll try and go through the data pretty quickly. And I do hope that it raises questions for you. Data doesn't always answer questions. Often it just makes you see a different way to ask something. And that's good. We're not going to have all the answers. You're going to think of new questions. When you're thinking about where is economic growth and opportunity, what does economic opportunity look like for the future of this community, then this data helps you see where you are, and that helps you see where you can go. So that's a little bit on the start.
So again, I'm Michelle Mackey, and it has been a real pleasure the past 2 years working with the Encourage team. They have great love for this community and great knowledge, and it's been very exciting to get to know this community and some of the assets. And that's really what we want to focus on today, are the strengths and the potential strengths of this community. So to start out, if I can get this to work, we're going to talk about who you are in terms of your population, demographics, and those trends over time and what they may say about the strengths that you can build on.
So in a very first thing to look at, obviously, is population. Then this is percent change of population for different communities of yours, and also the change in population of your school-age population. The change in your school-age population is a better way to say that. I think this is a challenge that you probably are familiar with, but it really does, in many ways, frame a kind of central issue for this community, and that is that your population is shrinking. Just to give you some context, the Wisconsin population is growing not particularly fast. You can always tell if a state is growing faster than the national average if it is gaining House seats in the congressional election and the decennial census. So we lost 1 House seat last time. That means, but that's not because Wisconsin was shrinking. It's just that our share of the population was shrinking. We were growing less fast than the rest of the nation. So Wisconsin's growth is pretty minimal, but Wisconsin Rapids is actually declining in population. And declining in population stresses a lot of systems. You have a lot of infrastructure that is probably bigger than the current population requires, and you have to figure out issues around that infrastructure in every way. So that's one challenge for this community. Is probably familiar, and it's especially clear in the school-age population, and Michelle has more on that.
So this chart basically tells the story that we talked about a little bit last year, which is that your school-age population is decreasing and not keeping pace with the amount of your population that is growing, that is either 60 plus or soon to enter that category. Last year we talked a little bit about what that means for enrollments into school. You'll see that again this year, but really what this means is that you will not have the youth in the workforce to replace retiring workers, that you don't have the young families in your community to sort of develop and build sort of that kind of vibrancy of having families around. And it also means that your opportunities in terms of workers with certain degree types wanting to come into the community might be decreased because they look around and they don't necessarily see a tipping point of that population sector. So this is an area that certainly you want to take notice of and start to build in strategies that will attract youth and as well as keep the youth that are coming through the high school. And we'll talk a little bit more about what they're thinking in terms of the types of jobs and things like that that they want to go into later. The other thing we want to highlight on this chart, on this particular slide, is diversity. We talk a little bit in Vital Signs about the trends across the nation. You've probably heard the statistics about 2045, the fact that the nation will no longer have a majority ethnic group. And so within Wisconsin, in Southwood County, what we're seeing is you're seeing more diversity in the younger population. So it's at about 12%. And the adult population, the non-white sector is much lower than the state rate. And so you'll see those two bars. The one on your far left is showing you the school-age children at 12%, and then you're seeing 7% for the adult population. Now, this doesn't just have an impact on diversity of perspective for your efforts to develop a community and to create leaders and get ideas about how to improve things, but it also impacts you economically, because there have been a number of studies showing a correlation between the amount of diversity you have in a community, particularly in immigrant populations, and your access or your the amount of innovation that's going on, the access to new markets, global markets, and the amount of entrepreneurship. There was a Kaufman study just last week about entrepreneurship and immigrant populations. So again, this is something that within the youth you're seeing a sea change, but within the adult population, there's some improvement. We're going to go through some indicators that impact, show the impact of the economy on families and communities. And we're going to talk about income and wages, unemployment, economic supports, and student homelessness.
And this is when I want to do a little timeout from Southwood County to remind you, as if you could have forgotten, that there's a broad national economic context that is dominating in some ways these numbers. So just to remind you of the obvious, this decade, this century began with a recession in 2001. It wasn't a particularly brutal recession, you can say that, especially when you've experienced the more recent one. But it was a significant recession, and it was especially significant in manufacturing. It hit hard in 2001. We had a jobless recovery through 2004 and 5. Finally, jobs started coming back. We hit a peak in 2007, but then hit in December of 2007, the next recession. You all, if you think of this recession, the Great Recession, you think of September of 2008. Perhaps you think briefly of Sarah Palin, nominated early in that month. A week or two later, Lehman tanks, right? And the financial crisis begins. That's when this recession feels like it begins. If you're watching the series on jobs, for example, in the United States, starting then for about 7 months, the national economy lost 750,000 jobs per month, a number of job losses at the national level that you know, almost no recession ever produces. And to see that month after month after month was shocking. Same scale of loss in Wisconsin over very late 2008, early 2009. But in fact, if you were watching manufacturing, 2007 is when things tipped in the state on that recession. And so anyway, that was a brutal recession, the worst we've seen since the Great Depression. The state and the nation lost about 6% of their jobs. We are still recovering. Neither the nation nor the state are out of the hole that was dug by the job losses. We are not back to employment levels of December 2007 yet. And because of these two recessions, it has been a very bad decade nationally and in the state for family income. So all of this, when you look at your income data, it is worth remembering you're looking at one of the worst decades you could ever look at. But I also, so having provided and reminded you of that context, I also want to say that things have been a little harder here. And that is partly about how brutal this recession has been, this decade has been for manufacturing. So for example, in the state of Wisconsin, we have 3 manufacturing workers for every 4 we had at the start of the century today. And that means manufacturing dependent towns, which has been one of the cores of the Wisconsin Rapids economy, have taken that hit harder. Any manufacturing dependent town or more manufacturing concentrated town has had a harder decade than the ones with less manufacturing dependence. That's just true. But it has been worse, a little bit worse here. This first slide, these are all on one table in your book on page 6, but we've split them out into 2. One is a kind of decade-long look from 2000 to 2011 on family income. And I'm going to just focus on Wisconsin Rapids because that's where the biggest population center, about half of the total population of Southwood County, not quite half of the population lives in Wisconsin Rapids. So watching that one is probably the most representative. You can see other ones jump around by quite a bit more, but all of it, every town there, save one, shows a decline in median family income. Oh, sorry, let me do a little geek thing. Median, you may recall, is the person, if you line people up in terms of family income, and family income is all wages and earnings from any source, any earner in the household. So it's probably 2 earners if you've got 2 earners. And in Wisconsin, women work more, so the chances that it's 2 earners are higher. And any other source of income, rents, anything coming in from the outside, but not, this is pre-tax income. So all that coming in. Then you line those people up and you take the one in the middle. And then you adjust for inflation, because you were going to ask me that. You were going to say, what do you mean it's gone down? Because my income is higher. But actually, if you adjust for inflation, then we see that's what's producing the 25% decline over 2000 to 2011 for Wisconsin Rapids. From 60,000 at that median family in 2000 to 48,200 at the median family. That is a lot of stress in the middle of your economy. You know you have a lot of stress in the unemployment. And part of what's going on in that is hours of work, right? People who used to count on and generate income in 2000 off of overtime lose that. People who lose jobs or lose hours. People who go to shorter shift schedules, et cetera. Everything's going on in that decline from 60,000 to 48. But that is a lot of stress right at the center. I think sometimes we think the economic recession is really about unemployed people, and that's a big part of it, and we'll see that. But also, this is the median income. This is the family smack dab in your middle. And they have less money today coming in than they did 10, 11 years ago. And that makes the interest, I think that tends to make people pretty closed and self-interested. And so I think it is a tribute to this community that in that context you are willing to think about what you're going to do together to change that trajectory, because I think it is a very easy time for people to get less connected to their community because they are more worried about themselves and their kids. This next one, I've spent too long on the first one, but the next one is just the 2-year trend from 2009 to 2011. Again, some decline across that. I should say these are sort of noisy statistics, so you cannot really go to the bank on the change over 2 years. The change over 11 years, that's down 25%, every year shows a decline. That's consistent. The 2-year change is negative here, about down 10%. I expect that's the right direction. I can't promise you that's the right amount. But anyway, so it means that even the recovery, which has technically begun, is not helping to stop the decline. And that's a little bit of bad news there. Is there more? Yeah,
So Laura talked a little bit about what people are earning, and I'm going to talk about what people need to earn in order to be self-sufficient. And by self-sufficient, what we mean is that they don't need social or public assistance from the community. And what this chart is showing, I've highlighted 2 columns. This standard of self-sufficiency shows different compositions of family. So you've got the 1 adult at the far left, and then you've got all the way to 2 earners with 2 children who are teenagers and school age. And sort of in the middle, what we've selected to talk about in vital signs throughout the document are the single earner family, the single parent family, with an infant and a preschool age child, because what you see in this self-sufficiency standard is it considers housing, it considers transportation, and it considers childcare along with other things. And childcare really pushes the expenses for a family up. In particular, if you're talking about an infant care and preschool age. So we focus on those 2 pieces for the family dynamic. And then we also talk a little bit about the 2 earner family that Laura mentioned, just because that tends to be what you're seeing a lot of in most of our communities. So what is this telling you? That if you are a single parent trying to raise a family of 2 or 2 children, then you're going to need $24.79 per hour with benefits in order to make it. So, that's a pretty, I know software engineers who aren't making that. So, sounds like a pretty high standard, but that's what moves you to be able to cover all of your expenses and not necessarily need assistance from the community or from public programs. For 2 adults, this gets a little tricky for people, and we even kept going back and forth in our additions. You need $15 and a penny, $15 but that's each earner. So both of the workers in that family need to be earning at least $15 an hour. And what you often see is that you have a moderate wage earner, and then you have somebody who's earning minimum wage. So you often see families that can't make this. So throughout the vital signs text, you will see us reference this self-sufficiency standard. This is for business leaders and community leaders. These are the numbers that you want to look to. You may not be there now. You may not get there for a while, but these are the numbers accounting for inflation, so every year they'll adjust, that you'll want to look to for trying to think about the kinds of jobs you want to attract and the kinds of jobs that you want to build.
How y'all doing? Okay. It's sort of funny, this light, I can't see you very well. Okay, so unemployment and labor force participation. Let's talk first about unemployment quickly. Again, the recession picture is there. You can see it, boop, right? That increase, that's 2008, whoop, big jump up. We've had a good drift down. Those unemployment rates are seasonally, I mean, not seasonally adjusted, but you can see how you have seasonal employment here, so that you get peaks and valleys across the course of a year. That's generally construction cycle that's sort of summer, and a retail cycle that's smaller but sort of pro-Christmas. So, but those are all averaging out into those, into that noise, but you can see it drifting down. That's the 2 things. The noise is the kind of jumping around. That's the seasonal cycle annually. But you can see it drifting down, and that's good news. And you can see it drifting down very, you're a percentage, a 0.5% still above where you were in 2007, but still, moving in a good direction. Now, unemployment, so one thing about unemployment is when unemployment is high, this is not just about unemployed people. That's hard to be unemployed, and as I was saying, but everything is rippling up, right? So when there is a long line of unemployed people in an economy, the people who do have jobs have less security in those jobs, both because they've seen people laid off, so they're worried, just by having seen that process, that they may be laid off, but also because they know that the kind of things that they could ask for when the line outside the door looking for jobs was shorter is harder to ask now. Can I go home? Can I go take my kid home from school? He's sick. Can I go to my kid's soccer game? You know, you ask that when you feel less replaceable. When you feel replaceable, these questions are harder to ask. And so it changes the dynamics even for employed people, especially those who are more easily replaced. The other thing to remember is that another thing to watch is the labor force participation rate, because unemployment can go down for good reasons and bad. The unemployment rate is just a question, and it is not related to how many people receive unemployment insurance. That's not the question. The question is, are you actively seeking work? And if you answer yes to that, and you have to answer yes to that to get UI, so everybody in there. But beyond that pool are people who are actively seeking work and cannot find it. That's the unemployed. Some people give up on actively seeking work when they decide they can't find it. Many people, especially older workers who look for 6 months or a year, if you ask them after a year, are you actively seeking employment, and they've thrown a lot of resumes to the wind and seen nothing come back, they say, no, I'm retired, right? So they don't show up in the unemployment statistic, but they would be working in this community if there was work. So that's the reason to watch the labor force participation rate. And that's a measure of the share of adults. And you can see that that also has come down. So more people are retired, or more people are, I'm staying home with my kids when the math on the child care expenses gets wrong. A lot of people just stay, women tend to opt out more. And you can see that number is also drifting down across this period, the labor force participation of your adults. So that's another place that shows weakness in this labor market, both on the employment side and labor force participation. And the next thing is, and this is true of the whole state, and we've included the whole state here in the blue graphs, slightly more true in Southwood County. This is the share of your kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch at the school. The share of the kids in schools that qualify has nearly doubled across the nation, across the state, from about 24% to about 40%. It's closer to doubling for you all. You were below Southwood County in 2000, below the state average at 22% of your kids, 1 in 5 kids in the classroom qualifying for free and reduced lunch. That's a low income status, about 185% of the poverty line for those of you who've watched that. But the threshold has not changed. By 2012, this most recent school year, 40% of the kids, so 2 of every 5 kids in a classroom, is facing material stress at home to such a level that we provide them food during the day at school. And that is a measure of economic stress in your community. It is a measure of stress in your schools, because when more kids are hungry or don't have sleep or have to take care of themselves after school or need to be translating for a parent or any of the number of things that can be going on, those are kids who can sometimes, be less easy in the classroom. And the teacher is getting extra work from them and has twice as many of those kids as she did 10 years ago.
So related to what Laura was just talking about, the stress that students are experiencing in terms of not having enough food or needing food support, we wanted to highlight the homelessness among the student population. And what you see is that, again, the orange bars are Southwood County, and the light blue bars are Wisconsin. And what you see is that consistently, Southwood County has been well above the rate for Wisconsin. And with the recession, it jumped up to well over 3%. And when we first did this chart, the new data wasn't out. And so we were hoping we'd be able to come in and say, woohoo, we're coming back down. But we're seeing fluctuation still at that above 2.5% level. So we last year said that this is definitely an area of opportunity for the community, identifying students who have a threat to home and a roof over their head, and helping those families as a whole is definitely something that a community can get around and will have a huge impact, as Laura was mentioning, on the ability of the youth to prepare for the future and learn and things like that. So we highlight a few other economic support areas in the text. We wanted to get on to workers and employers, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that or any time on that today. But we do talk about Medicaid caseloads, food share, and those supports that are provided. So I encourage you to look at page 10. Also child care slots and child care costs, which Laura also talked about earlier. Okay, so the next section is your drivers. So what we mean by that is, what are those parts of your community that are going to assist with economic opportunity and economic growth? Of course, when you think economics, you think employers, so we cover that. But key to employers being able to do what they do, businesses being able to do what they do, are workers. COWS really focuses on the worker aspect. So we'd like to lead with, we talk about that as well. And you've also got education, and we conclude with community engagement, and a new section this year is safety.
So I know, I've done this job for a long time, 18 years now, and I'm kind of a downer. And I don't really mean to be a downer. The economy has been pretty brutal in certain ways. But I do, I think I don't want you only to be taking, a kind of negative picture from this. And I think this section really helps us get to not just the challenges that are so evident in some of this data, but also where the answers are. And I think education is obviously a place where the answers are. This is just a quick look at student test performance. And let me say, we would love this to have shown you the series over time, but the state DPI changed the threshold for proficient. Anybody inside education knows this. There was a kind of big change in how we measure what's proficient and exceeding standards. Which messes up the comparability of the line. I think it's true that being a higher standard and more what we do aspire to is probably a good thing, but it does mean that looking at the data over time doesn't really work this year so perfectly. But so we just present here the 2012-2013 and how your schools are doing. And I think there's an important thing to notice here. Straight across the board, your schools look like they're performing at the state average, or especially for the younger kids, 4th and 8th grade, slightly above. You're doing a little better in your schools. It's worth remembering your schools have a little more economic stress than most schools in this state. And in spite of that, the kids are doing better. And I think that's a real tribute to your education system and the teachers you have, and the way that people are working in those schools. Again, when you get to the 10th grade level, then the Wisconsin average is a little higher, but still very close. And that, I think, is one good thing. Your students are spot on the state median. Another strength is in terms of educational attainment. And here, what is the Wisconsin Rapids, the Southwood County and surrounding area, really, where is your adult workforce? What is the education level most prominent there, or where do you really stand out? And that's at the associate degree level. You can see that you have, I can't quite run over there, but the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th set of stacks, and it's probably easier to see this in your book, and I am going to run over there because it's so irresistible to me. This is your associate's degree line. This is for Waukesha and Cedars Point and Wausau, but your associate's degree line in your adult population is higher. And that is where you have a concentration. You will also see that the 4-year degree and the graduate degrees, you are low. And And that is, I think, both a product of supply and demand. We'll see some evidence on that later. But you do have real strength at the associate's degree level, and that is where a lot of your employers are looking for workers as well. There's no coincidence there.
So Laura talked about sort of the educational composition of the workforce. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what people are earning based on that, or this slide tells you that, and also what they're doing. So basically at every educational level, in Southwick County, I feel like Laura now being a downer, at every level, people in Southwick County earn a little bit less than their counterparts across the state and across the country. Now, one option we could possibly do is do a comparison on comparable towns, as we just showed in the educational attainment, and that might show you sort of how you compare to communities that near you and similar to you. But you know, if you're making a decision between Wisconsin Rapids and somewhere else in the state, roughly, you would earn more in this area. Now, what this slide is also showing you is that at 20%, still most of the jobs are in manufacturing. Most of your workers are finding a job in manufacturing. And also, given demographic trends, it's not surprising that a lot of people are finding jobs in healthcare. So the other sector I want to point out here, because I'm not sure it shows up anywhere else, is information. So it's the last one on that made the chart, but it stands out for its share given the statewide amount. So you're looking at 4.4% in this area compared to what the state number of workers the state has in information at 3%. So that is an opportunity to potentially build on. Finally, the last section there talks about occupational categories. And you see that the larger lines are management professional jobs, sales, production jobs, which, you know, given the manufacturing you would expect, but it's not retail, which is a great thing, because in some communities you see that you have a lot of people moving into jobs that don't necessarily pay even close to those self-sufficiency wages that we're talking about. This is me still, sorry. Oh, we're losing track. So this section now talks about where the jobs are going to be in the future. And also, I alluded to earlier, what your high school students, so every year DPI asks a question of the graduating class, what do you think you're going to do next? So the one in the corner shows you where they think they're going to go. And let's starting with the job openings. What you'll see in those bars is that with the exception of healthcare, all of the industries that are represented there, you're going to have more openings because of retirements than you're going to have because people are, you know, adding to their workforce. So that's a definite opportunity to start preparing people to take those jobs that you know already exist in your community. You're not dependent upon necessarily a lot of business growth. You're going to have jobs opening up. And at the top of the line, you've got some office and administrative support. There's a lot of those replacement openings. And you also have a lot of replacement openings in, I think, industry that's affiliated with production here, which is transportation, and they also include moving in there, but it's probably your transportation sector. So what does the class of 2012 want to do? Are they going to be ready and interested in fulfilling these jobs? Well, you do see, like Laura mentioned about your educational attainment, a lot of people, students who want to get associate's degrees. They're saying they're going to vocational school. So that's great because you have those jobs, you're already high in that area, and now you have more students who want to get those degrees and fill what we call middle skill jobs. The other side of that coin, though, is you also still have a lot of students saying they're going to get bachelor's degrees. And we talked a little bit earlier about some data that shows that for bachelor's degrees holders, they don't necessarily make the earnings consistent with the state average. And we'll see some more data later about the types of jobs that are available for bachelor's degree holders.
This is about women and work. So from 1990 to 2012, something happened in the Southwood County economy, and that is that now more than half of your workforce is women. This wasn't true even 5 years ago. And this is important for a number of reasons. It's true, and I told you earlier, Wisconsin tends to generate very high rates of women's labor force participation, 10% higher than the national rate of women's labor force participation. And I think in many ways that was in part a response, an income maintaining response to the decline in manufacturing. As people lost hours or jobs or pay fell in manufacturing, all three of these things happened. Mostly men, not only men, but mostly men lost those jobs. Women were increasingly drawn to generate paid income in the labor market in Wisconsin. So Wisconsin Rapids is 50% of the workforce here is women now. And those women face a substantial gender gap in wages. The gender gap in wages, of course, is the result of a number of things. Some of them that can be solved by making teenagers think differently about where their opportunities are, so that you don't just instantly think, oh, I'm going to be a child care worker because I've babysat, or I'm going to go into maintenance, I'm going to be an operating engineer because I'm a lawnmower. That there's gender ideas about jobs, that people choose courses, and those can have a significant impact on that life differential in wages. But women still do face a significant difference in wages, even beyond that gender selection thing that happens when a person chooses a certain career, and women's careers are paid less. Also, even within jobs, women tend to be paid less. And also women tend to take time off to take care of kids, and so their experience is less consistent, and their hours tend to be less consistent in the labor market. So all of these things are going on in that gender differential. I don't want to pretend that that whole thing is the result of sexist practice by employers or whatever, but it is true that there's a pretty substantial wage gap, and half the income that's getting generated in this community is getting generated by women, and that thinking about things that can help close that wage gap actually is going to have a substantial effect on on family income in this community. And this one, all right, this last bit, we are going to spread out. We've been Southwood County up until now. We are going to spread into Wood County, and there's a few reasons for this. One is data availability. There are some things that you can say about a whole county because of the way, mostly we're using federal sources for data here. And there are some things that are just not available at the smaller level. I think it's also true that we are increasingly tied to a larger region. When economic opportunity is shifting, a lot of workers are driving to find that. And so the region becomes more relevant as things move around. So I do think people's economic opportunity is defined on a slightly broader scale today than it was probably in the past because of the need to look elsewhere, and because of the way opportunity is flowing through this region. Anyway, so I do think it's important sometimes to think about what's going on in the region. The first step towards that is to looking at Wood County. This is just a kind of overview on total employment, percent change in total employment, essentially since the recession. And this is that data I kind of mentioned before, but for Wood County. The Wisconsin economy still has 3% fewer jobs today than it did in December 2007. Wood County as a whole has 5% fewer jobs today than it did in 2007. And let me say that that's almost 13, that's almost 6 years now. And that is a long time, by American economic growth standards, to have a decline in jobs. That is a very long-lasting recession. This is a longer employment loss shadow than caused by the recession of the 1980s, which was previously the most brutal recession we'd ever seen. This is a long decline in total jobs, and it's emphasized here in Wood County. Okay, so then here is where we dig into the data that's only available at the county level. And we look at a few things, and I want to, so the first thing is the biggest employers, the top 5 by employment. This is page 20. And you can see, you know, ambulatory care, and all of you instantly know why, because we moved to Wood County. Ambulatory care moved to the top of the charts. You know why, right? Marshfield.
And that's clinics and doctor's offices.
Yes, and it's Marshfield.
It's not just ambulances.
Yeah, oh yeah, ambulatory care means people who can walk into the care provider and walk out. So it's not hospitals, it's doctor's offices and big clinics. So that's your dominant employer. Coming down, truck transportation, paper manufacturing, none of these will surprise. These are your big employers. This is where the core of the workforce is. This is what is generating the numbers on the chart that Michelle showed about replacement employment. These are the kind of employers that are generating those jobs, that are going to generate those retirements. These are your big employers. The second is growth. Growth is a weird statistic, and you should always remember that. If there are 2 people employed in a sector, and then there are 4, that sector doubled. That's 100% growth, right? But it's a teeny tiny irrelevant sector. So be very careful when you look at the percentage changes to remember that underneath it, size matters a lot. So somebody can double or triple or increase by 30% and not be as important as something that's staying the same and going to generate a bunch of replacement jobs. Anyway, your big growers are next, and social assistance is there, store retail, rubber products manufacturing, repair and maintenance. All these show big growth, and we've included the employment size so you can see, how much growth that actually is relative even to your top 5 employers. The last 2 panels are looking at folks with college degree, because we really wanted to dig into this question of folks with 4-year college degrees or more. And where is their employment, and where is employment growing for them? And the dominant industries, again, you start with those, not hospitals, but the clinics and the doctor's offices. Paper manufacturing, this is one of your dominant employers of folks with 4-year college degrees. Truck transportation, these are your big employers, happen to have also your big employment of folks with 4-year college degrees for the management, generally I assume, for the management of those companies. Publishing industries, and credit and intermediation, which gets you to the information occupation that Michelle mentioned earlier. And then there's 5 in terms of growth. And these are not very strong growth. And that was one of the things, I think I would highlight that first. There is not a lot of growth in your employment of folks with 4-year college degrees. And the places you're getting it, social insurance and social assistance and merchandising, again, you're not seeing, that's not generating very many jobs anyway, but it's not very dynamic sectors. You're not, and that's probably kind of something to think pretty hard about when you're thinking about your folks with 4-year college degrees. And in many ways, again, that retirement thing is relevant actually at all points on the educational distribution to thinking about those, what are your top employers for folks with 4-year college degrees in many ways is more important than thinking of your top growers. I think you always want to balance both of those, but in some ways, the emphasis on the current structure, where your dominant is now, especially if you don't have a lot of growth, but you will have a lot of replacements, your current employment matters more than chasing what might come next. Your opportunities are generated by retirements more than growth anyway. So you need to have a handle on and a strategy for dealing with retirements so that none of those employers find that, oh my gosh, all my four-year degrees, people who knew how to do this left and now I can't find anyone, or all my people with this kind of associate's degree, that kind of skill, long built in this job. When I wasn't hiring and bringing up more people with that skill, they get to that point and they lose those folks and they don't know how to continue to produce. So I think in many ways, one of the things we learned from this is that paying attention to what you do have and thinking about that retirement generated opportunity is absolutely critical.
Great. We are at the last page. So I want to talk a little bit about, oh, I went too far. Two sections, the community engagement piece where we talk about volunteerism and voter participation. Here I'm going to highlight voter participation and then move into the new section, which is safety. Clearly, given this forum and the purpose of this document, the community engagement piece, we wish we had more data for it because it really is the linchpin. The purpose of having the data and of having these kinds of events is to really get the community engaged and participating and informed. And you've heard, probably ad nauseum now about jobs and workers and where people are going and what they're earning and that sort of thing. But what does that mean? What's the next step? And in order to do those next steps, you need to come together as a community. Of course, one of those ways that everybody comes together as a community every 2 years is to vote. And what we've seen in this community is while you still do better than your neighbors, there has been over time a decline in voter participation. What we highlight in this year's vital signs is the difference between the two presidential elections, and you did see a decline there. And often you will have more people showing up for elections than you might have at town halls, or you might have at government meetings. All of these are very important in order for a community to inform their elected leaders on what's important about this kind of data to them, right? What they think the next steps should be. So we'd like to include a piece on community engagement every year. We're always on the hunt for more data that we can use to inform you about how you're performing in that area. And so if people have ideas, that's definitely something that we would love to hear about. So the next piece is safety. And, we started out in the document, I think the first sentence that we started with was, this is a very safe area. And Encourage staff was like, well, compared to what, So we hadn't pulled that data, so next year that's on our list. But I did a little digging, and what you do see, these trend lines just coming down. And property crimes, which is the dark black line, you had a little blip during the recession, which is to be expected. It happens all over the country. And the bottom line, which you can barely distinguish from the axis, is your violent crime rate, which is usually what people, sort of latch on to when they're thinking about moving their family somewhere or they're thinking about starting a business somewhere. They're like, is it going to be a safe area? And that's usually associated with violence, right? You all are sort of flatlined. That doesn't mean you have zero. You did have 0 murders last year. I looked that up. But, there are some assaults and things like that. Compared to your neighbors, which I looked up yesterday, you are very, very low. I think they were all like 3 to 5 times higher on that metric than you all are. But on property crimes, that trend line that we're showing here, there's only one county that outdoes you of your neighboring counties, and that's Adams County. Property crime has been a problem in this area, so I would look at that trend line as something to focus on. And we highlight in the document a part of the community that is focusing on that, so I point that out to you. And then the other 2 lines are just arrests to show you that piece. Any questions?
It seems that retirement is, filling those retirement jobs is so important, and yet in this economy, a lot of those jobs are not being refilled. And do you have projections on that or data on that?
Well, those projections of job openings are from DWD, and projections of job openings is I'm glad DWD does it, so I don't have to, because it is, you know, a bit of a guess, and it is because it is very hard to predict that Great Recession is going to happen, right? So the projections across 2008 were just wrong, incredibly wrong, and in fact they've been pretty wrong even through this recession, because it is hard to imagine that this recession is going to generate as few jobs. The recovery is going to generate as few jobs as it has so far. That said, their methodology takes into account the, you know, what they can see about the future, what the best economists are predicting about the future, as well as what they've seen in the past, and that's what's generating those levels of employment projection across 10 years. So I would say, you know, is it certainly true that those are going to come up in the next 10 years? No, obviously not. They're projections, and that means that they're based on the best possible data. But I do think it is true, and you know, we've been in this slide, in this stagnation for so long, and firms have worked in a lot of directions to figure out how to do what they did with less workers. And at some point you hit the wall on that, and two things happen. People get comfortable enough to retire, and firms know they need to replace. And I feel like we're coming to that. You know, we've seen the up in employment nationally over the last 2 years. In Wisconsin, a little more unevenly, but certainly consistently up over the last year. And so I feel like it's reasonable to say that that's coming. But I agree, it hasn't been very good years for that.
In your data collection, have you found or studied the relationship between Stevens Point, Wisconsin Rapids, and Marshfield? The perception is that Wisconsin Rapids is really the low-cost area for housing. And I think all of us in this room know that a lot of people live here but may work in those other two communities. And this would foster perhaps communication issues. You know, is there something that can be relocated, or is this just a perception, or is it really a fact?
We have, I know, some commute data. We don't have a lot on the relationships between the different communities. And again, this is a place where you're pushing the data pretty hard. But we do have some commute data in there, which I know Michelle's looking for, about how much people drive around. And I think there's two things to realize about that. One is about thinking more broadly about building a regional economy. I think too often, especially at the city level, you can get very engaged in citing wars of retail, where, you know, one side of the border or another matters a lot to the property tax base, but does not matter at all to the jobs base of the region, or in fact who will work at that store if you just move it across a border. And so I would say that, you know, the economic development thing, to think about how do people move around and how often are people moving around. I think we found increasingly that people are driving a longer way to work. We don't have exactly how many move from this community to that community. But so watching that kind of interaction also helps remind people that this labor market is bigger than just Wisconsin Rapids. So that if you're coming with a spouse who has a kind of set of skills that doesn't look like it fits in Wisconsin Rapids, it's good for you to say, yeah, but everybody drives, you know, to these other places. That makes your labor market a little thicker. This is why, you know, young people tend to go, one of the many reasons young people go to big cities, because they have very thick labor markets that can soak up two people with different skill sets, right? And the thinner your labor market, the less you can move two jobs, you can find two jobs at the same time in it. And so to be able to demonstrate a thicker labor market for young couples who are probably both gonna work, you know, matters in terms just of even your economic self-presentation as well. So it's a good point.
So the commute data is on page 15, and what we did find is consistent with what you're saying, is that, you know, 40% of people are going north. And the way the commute data is, it's, you know, it's not what we would think is north, which you'd say, okay, great, we know where that is. It's like the northeast sector and the northwest sector, and it's a little muddled. But roughly 40% are traveling north. And what we found, you'll see big bars for less than 10 miles, you still have a number of people working locally, but we did see a big increase in the number of people who are driving 25 plus miles. So this gets to Laura's point that, you know, that actually is not a bad thing, because it's sort of thickening your labor market in terms of people's perception of what their community is and what they're willing to do. You know, it gets a little dicey with trying to take care of kids when you're, you know, and that sort of thing on the road for that much. And, you know, we included the OWI arrests actually on the chart. And one of the thoughts was that, you know, for a community, rural communities tend to drive more anyway. Actually making sure your roads are safe and your drivers are safe on those roads is a good asset. The fact that you guys are coming down on that, especially in this state where those numbers tend to go up, and that your roads are safe, and it's okay to have families driving 25 miles, let's say, for childcare and picking up people after work and that sort of thing. But you're definitely right about sort of that broader perspective of what the region is.
So we have time for about maybe 2 more questions. I have one right here, and then maybe down there. Okay.
Yes, you said that we national elections that people come out, and that's great. But then, like showing support for city council meetings and so on, you have less. And I think, how can we motivate people to come out? Because on a local level, that influence will show that we're supporting new industry, or also it also reflects people looking at us, see that we're active in our community and that we're socially thinking about what's going on locally, not just nationally. So again, it's great that they come out nationally to vote for elections, but how can we get that interest of the local people?
Well, you know, one of the things that we've been talking to Encourage about is different ways of getting information out to the community that would speak to a lot of different audiences. So being able to take data like this and tailor it to a specific audience around a specific issue or something like that, that would, you know, at a moment's glance, enable people to see what the challenge is or what the opportunity is, and then hold meetings around that sort of thing, and for, you know, let's say the council to be able to use that kind of information in a way that attracts people to want to come and talk about it. So from, you know, our data geek world, that's sort of an approach. Also, you know, I think that is a challenge that Encourage constantly is trying to work on, how to get the message out. I know they've had a lot of consultants out talking to them about information gathering and information dispersal. Any ideas, I think, from anybody would be welcome. And just talking to your community, to your neighbors. I know I live in a small town, and, you know, we get riled up over something and you see everybody running around and getting people to come to meetings. So I think it's, you know, pretty grassroots kinds of ideas that get people to community meetings. And it's a challenge for most communities.
What I see here is some very well presented data, or it's graphs and presentation of data. But it occurs to me that you must have a lot more data than you're showing here. So, for example, we've got statistics about educational attainment for these different areas, and we've got Marshfield, Stevens Point, Warsaw, and then the Southwood County area, but nothing which is identified as Wisconsin Rapids. Now, that might be a particularly useful piece of information, but I'm assuming you collected that data in order to be able to prepare this chart. Similarly, you've got things like number of business startups, but not the number of business closures. You've also got statistics on median income, but not on mean income. And all that data that you've collected could be useful if it's publicly accessible. So have you got either the raw data or further data presented in additional ways available publicly, either on a website or in any other form?
I think there's a couple of answers. Sometimes what you said was right. You assumed we needed to have the underlying to make the aggregate statistic. Sometimes it's actually that the underlying doesn't exist. It's only the aggregate that's available. So I'm not positive that I can confirm that everything you said about what exists is true, but the general idea that there is data, there's a lot of data that sits under this, and last year's report and all that. We have, some of it is accessible through the website, but we have been thinking about that a little, and we don't have it all up.
So Encourage has, I think, basically the charts available. We did a little thinking with them this past year about how to provide sort of interactive charts that would enable you to see underlying data and things like that. At the time, it required a lot more resources than we had to do that and put that online. The other answer I would say is we pull, as Laura mentioned, from federal sources. All of those sources are cited. I will say that we spend a lot of time pulling data, and we have graduate students who spend a lot of time pulling data, because the interface isn't very user-friendly, so sometimes it can be difficult to pull that. But it's there for the public, so it's presumably designed for anybody to pull it. And I think this is a continuing struggle to try and figure out how much to make available out of what we've pulled. We're certainly willing to, but it does take a lot of resources to put it on an online system. And then the last point I would make is, as Laura mentioned at the very beginning, we look at, I don't even know how many indicators at the beginning of this process every year, and between our conversations with Encourage and what we're seeing in the data, we make decisions about what we're going to present that year. Usually we're looking for something that is meaningful and tells a story that would resonate with you all, and isn't just a flat line. We could sort of just tell somebody that as opposed to showing it. So if there's pieces that you think are missing, I know that the next part is about that. So please put them on the list. We literally started this process this year with your list from last year. And I had a grad student go through and figure out what was possible, and then we all sat around and tried to figure out what we were going to go after for this edition. So this matters. What you put on those sheets and what you tell us is exactly where we start every year. So thank you, and I'll let Liz.
Yeah, so I'd also add too that Encourage places a lot of this data on our website, but if you have any specific questions or needs for a conversation that you're going to be having, please don't be afraid to give us a call. We can direct you to the online source where you can even dig further, but that's completely up to you. So we will have some information available on our website. And I'd like to now turn it over to Gus and Heather, who will be facilitating a discussion.
So what we're going to do is just have a few minutes of follow-up comments, and then we're going to be asking you as well. I'm just going to make a few brief comments here, and then Helen, our board president, is going to also mention some comments as well. There's a lot of good news about this data in many respects. Mike Zerflu, who had to go, unfortunately, won't hear the answer to this question, but I'm certainly going to talk to him about sharing this data. And Mike asked the question, well, how do we grow solutions to what we're facing in terms of the data that was produced today and in the years past? And I think it's important for us to know that Encourage, as well as our entire community, are doing some very, very positive things. Over the past 18 months, a group called REGI, which stands for Regional Economic Growth Initiative, some people in this room, in fact, are on that, have been meeting monthly to talk about a regional economic growth plan. This presentation has gone out to approximately 12 of the municipalities in which we are asking for their support financially, as well as in the spirit of it as well, to support a regional economic growth plan, which in fact will come up with many of the solutions to the data that you see there. So there are a lot of good things going on. About 18 people are working very, very hard to come up with that plan, and you're going to hear more about that plan in the next 6 months. If you attended any of the municipality meetings, you certainly heard about 35 to 40-minute presentation which in fact we used much of the same data that you saw here today to emphasize the fact, why is this data important? Because really what happens is if you tell people a good enough reason why, they will find the solution. And what we're hoping is that as we work together with our municipalities, that they look at this thing globally. So that's REGI, Regional Economic Growth Initiative. And we're asking for a financial support for us as a group of REGI to really have a focused regional economic plan. There's also been another very, very exciting group that's been meeting, and again, some other people in this room are a part of that group as well. There is a group called the Business Education Partnership. August 28th of last year, Encourage made a presentation, 2 hours and 5 minutes, to all 3 of the school boards up and down the river about much of the data that you saw here. It was 2 hours and 5 minutes at Port Edwards. And we talked about this data and said that businesses and educators have to begin working together to help solve this issue. And so on a monthly basis, all the school districts in this community, including Assumption Catholic Schools, as well as Emmanuel, plus the 3 other school districts and business representatives, are talking in a respectful, safe space in which they're talking about how we can align our curriculum to better help the STEM program, which is what we're talking about: science, technology, education, and math. How can we work with businesses for business support about what it is that we need to talk about in the curriculum? And all 5 school districts are playing. We have 4 subcommittees. We're looking at the curriculum K-5, 6-14, which includes Midstate. We also have another group called the Apprenticeship Program. They met this morning, and we're infusing apprenticeship programs in some of our larger industries as a starting point. And we also have probably the most important group from my point of view. We also have a community education group in which those people on that subcommittee are going to be talking about the value of education, talking about the value of manufacturing. Our biggest challenge is not necessarily what happens in businesses as well as in the schoolhouse. Our biggest challenge is changing the language about our community in many, many ways. The language about manufacturing is good. Nakusa, Damtar, for example, is going to have a huge, what they call silver tsunami. You read about it right now. That is actually a business in an industry coming to town because we need to replace those workers. So our point is we're growing much of what the solutions are. The third thing that we've also been doing is we've been holding some one-on-one relationship building training, if you will, with people that are interested in doing that, and people going out and doing one-on-one relationship building and deepening our relationship based on trust, based on understanding each other. So Encourage, along with our community, is doing an awful lot. But it's going to take more than just Encourage doing it. And as we finish here, I want to challenge everybody here to understand that if we're going to get this done, it's got to be together. You know, we can sit in the data, we can absorb it, and we can walk out of here and say, well, that's somebody else's problem. But I really believe the people in this room have the ability to make the changes, whether you're in municipal leadership, whether you're in the schoolhouse, whether you're working in an industry, it doesn't matter. You have the ability every single time to change the language, to talk positively about our community, to care about your neighbors, because that's the only way it's going to happen. It's only going to happen if people step up and take advantage of what's going on and care about each other, because that's the way communities recreate themselves. They share their gifts, they build associations and relationships, and they care about each other. And every community that successfully recreates itself has those 3 things on their plate. And they're grounded in them. And it's not like we're talking about church. We're talking about daily living. That's what we have to do. We got to do more of that. So what we want to do before I turn it over to Helen, I'd like to ask you to fill out, because we were going to have a little bit of interactive piece here, but it's almost 12 o'clock. I would like you to spend a few minutes and answer just put that data down there. What surprised you about the information that you found today? What really surprised you? The second question is there about the impact. Where can we leverage? What can we do to impact this information and use it? And if it means, if you think that this should be on everybody's plate, if they're an educator or the real estate people or the bankers or the church people, put that down so that we have that information about what our next steps could be. Take a few minutes to do that, and then Helen has some closing comments for you as well.
You know, Laura and Michelle are information geeks, and they surely shared a lot of data with us this morning. Well, I just have to tell you, whenever I get on a stage, every stage is my place where I like to just say a few words, and I just love being able to talk here. So if you will just give me permission, I'd like to just end this with something that I've shared with many people. It happened over at Witter Field. It was a morning this summer, and there was an elder gentleman sitting up in the stands. And he was just enjoying the beautiful morning and reflecting on the Raptors game the night before. And all of a sudden, this little guy came out on the field with his ball and his bat. And the gentleman was kind of leaning back and kind of wondering what this little guy was going to do. And so he got out on the diamond, and he's right in the middle of the field, and he throws the ball up, and he swings, and he misses, and he goes, "Oh, I'm the best baseball player in the whole world!" The guy up in the stand is going, "What's he talking about?" And he watches, and the little boy throws the ball up, swings, and he misses, and he goes, "Jeepers! Is anybody better than me?" The man's up there just scratching, just kind of sitting there. He watches one more time. The little boy throws the ball up in the air, he swings, and he misses, and he goes, "I know! I'm the best baseball player in the whole world!" Well, this gentleman could not remain leaning back, sitting in the stand. He had to go and find the answer to his question, much like Laura said that we have to. So he climbs down out of the stand, and he goes up to this young guy, and he goes, "Young man, I've been watching you all morning, and you keep throwing the ball up and you keep missing. You're striking out. How can you possibly think that you're the best baseball player in the whole world?" And the little boy puts his hat on, and he looks up and goes, "Mister, I wasn't at bat. I was the pitcher." You know what? What Gus is saying, and what all of us are here for today, is to find out what questions we should get the answers on. And by seeing all of you sitting out here today, I mean, we've got double the people that were here last year. Certainly all of you came to learn the data, but more importantly, I hope all of you will try to figure out what question you need answered. You know, we are Team Encourage, and all of you in this room are part of our team. And so we would invite all of you to invite your neighbors, to invite your families, to invite your friends, to find out what they can do to help us find the answers in the future. I know that you all will. We have the tools to help you. All you have to do is ask the question. Don't be like the old gentleman up in the stands at first, where he's just sitting confused about what was going on, but rather be that gentleman who came forward and asked the question. He found out that this little boy wasn't a terrible pitcher or terrible batter. He found out he was a great pitcher. That's what we're going to find out with the data that we have. Thank you all for coming.